Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Ground and Pound Cast. It is your host, the world's okayest Jiu-Jitsu Blue Belt, Vince. Although tonight I don't really feel like the world's okayest Jiu-Jitsu Blue Belt because I went to train for the first time in a few weeks earlier tonight, and I just got completely smothered by pretty much everybody. It was a rough night for me, so if you hear me a little short of breath tonight as I'm recording this podcast episode, that's the reason why. But the show must go on. Also, I don't have my co-host tonight. They both were not able to make it, so I'm running solo tonight. So yeah, had a pretty rough night in the gym, but that's okay. We train. Sometimes we have bad days. We get better. We learn from it. So it's all good. It's all gravy. I walked away with no injuries. I learned a few things. We get a little bit better. So even if you have a rough night in the gym, it's all right. That's just you getting better. So don't give up. For those of you that are training, you're having a hard time, keep on going and it will get better. So anyway, this past weekend we had some fights. And I know one of my co-hosts last week was talking about how this card didn't really have much sticking out to him that seemed very exciting, anything he was really excited to tune in for. So he was saying you might as well skip that event and spend your time with the family. And that's what I did. I spent time with the family instead, but I later went back and watched the replay of it so I could be up to date on everything that happened, so I could, talk about everything that happened, so we know what is going to happen in these divisions, these weight classes, the winners and losers, where these people are going to move on from here. So we still have to cover everything, even if it's just a fight night. But also, this is a very historic fight night. Regardless of how unstacked this card might seem, it's the very last card, it's the very last event of 2025, and it's the very last event on ESPN. Unless later on down the line they decide to go back to ESPN, but this is the end of an era, this event this past weekend. So we have to talk about it. The main event was a person who I absolutely cannot stand, Manel Kape, an eye poke merchant and all-around terrible human being, going against Brandon Royval. Brandon Royval, he's a very interesting fighter. He had a very interesting year. He had a very interesting year because he was involved with a few very historic events, but on the losing end of those events. So you had what most people believe was the fight of the year, and I agree that I think that was the best fight of the year. Earlier this year, Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van went to a decision. Brandon Royval came up short. And then this past weekend, you have Brandon Royval and the very last fight of 2025, the very last fight of the ESPN era. Brandon Royval goes against Manel Kape, and he loses by KO in the first round. Now, some people were saying it's a little bit early. He got knocked down and his lights were out for about a half a second, and he was able to recover. It was one of those weird flash KOs. You could see the lights go out. His eyes roll back and he kind of goes limp for a minute, but he immediately recovers. He gets back up, or he starts to try to get back up. You see he's starting to move a little bit, but Manel Kape smelled blood in the water, jumped all over him, and just kept hitting him. The ref had to pull him off. It was a good stoppage. It was a proper stoppage. Even though Royval was able to stand back up and it was all said and done, you're like, how does this guy, how is this a person who just got knocked out? It looks like he wasn't knocked out. That's a flash KO. This kind of things happen. It was a proper stoppage. So Manel Kape is going to leapfrog up the rankings here because Brandon Royval was ranked number 2, right behind Pantoja, the former champion, and the current champion, Joshua Van. So Royval is ranked number 2, and Manel Kape just knocked out number 2. Now, the rankings have not been updated, but I'm going to assume that this is going to leapfrog Kape up to number 2 in the division. Number 1 is Pantoja, who is out on injury, and we don't know how long he's going to be out because of the injury he sustained going against Joshua Van, where he messed up his arm really bad. So he's probably going to be out for a little while. So most likely what this means is Manel Kape has earned himself a title shot, and he's going to be going against Joshua Van. And it's going to be very interesting because Van and Royval had a pretty close match. It did go to decision, and I agree Van won, but it was still one of those where, if you had had another round, who knows how things could have turned out differently. It was a pretty close back and forth fight, and Kape just mowed through Royval like he was an amateur. It was very impressive. As much as I don't like Kape, as much as I want to say very terrible things about him, he is a very talented fighter. Now, if you actually watch the whole fight, it was only 3 minutes, 18 seconds, and according to the stats that I'm seeing, they both landed 17 strikes. So just off the numbers, it feels pretty equal. And actually looked to me like Royval was backing up and landing pretty decent counter strikes, but Kape was very composed. He was pushing forward, and Royval wasn't really landing anything that powerful. So every time Royval landed something on him, Kape would just eat it and keep moving forward. He was moving forward pretty much the whole fight that I remember. I don't remember him backing up hardly at all. And then finally when he was able to find that opening, just land that perfect punch, dropped Royval, and then just jumped all over him. There's only 17 strikes landed by both of them. Both of them landed 17 each. So it wasn't like a barn burner where they're just throwing back and forth and back and forth. It was very measured. But Kape, I was very impressed. As much as I want to talk bad about him, I was very impressed with the way he was able to stay composed, continue forward pressure. And even though I think Royval earlier on was landing more frequently, it seemed like Kape was landing more efficiently. And that's what eventually led to the knockout finish. So now he's going to be going against Joshua Van. So if Van and Royval had a very close competitive fight and Kape just mowed through Royval, what does that mean is going to happen between those two when they fight? Now, I know MMA math doesn't always play out that way, but you look at the way they fight, and at least in the stand-up game, because Royval has a very good ground game. We didn't get to see it on display in this fight, but Royval does have a very good ground game. And in the fight with Van, even though he has a good ground game, he didn't really display it much either. It was mostly stand-up battle, and I think that their striking styles are pretty similar. And if Van is going to stand and try to box with Kape, and he probably will, and Kape looked that good with the stand-up against Royval, I think that could be a very dangerous fight for Van. And I wonder if Van's going to win this title off of an injury and then immediately lose in his first title defense. And then, of course, we'll see Pantoja returning from injury and trying to get his belt back. Will Van be one of these transitional champions, or will he defeat this very dangerous opponent that is Kape and really show the world that he is deserving of that title? So if there is one big takeaway from this event, it is this fight and what it means for the future of the flyweight division. And I'm going to say right now, the flyweight division has been on fire this year. The flyweight division has always been a division a lot of people just didn't seem to care about. When you get fighters that are too small, you get below lightweight. In years past, at least, when you get below lightweight, people seem to care a little bit less. Now, eventually, featherweight got really exciting. Bantamweight has kind of had their ups and downs. Right now, I think they're kind of on an up. But flyweight's never really gotten that love. People in hindsight look at Demetrius Johnson, they say he is one of the greatest fighters of all time when it comes to fight IQ and just being well-rounded and having exciting fights. But if you watch the fights back then, if you actually paid attention to the fight game back then, when he was in his prime and he was on that spectacular title run, people were not giving him his flowers like they are now. It's kind of like an artist, like an actual like drawn art, like a painter that doesn't get famous till after they die. And I'm not saying, that Mighty Mouse is dead, but I'm just saying he's retired. He's out of the game. It's kind of like that, where you have these artists who don't really get famous until like they die. And then later on, people start talking about, wow, did you ever pay attention to how good this dude's paintings are? And then they get famous afterwards. It's kind of the same thing with Demetrius Johnson. Whenever he was doing the work, whenever he was in his prime, when he was winning all of these title defense matches, people didn't care that much. He wasn't getting pay-per-view points like all the rest of the champions were. And Dana White was even talking about doing away with the flyweight division. I'm very glad he didn't, because if you go back and just watch some of the best fights from 2025. Most of them were flyweight fights. Again, fight of the year. Most likely fight of the year, Royval versus Van. And then you had Pantoja, who was on, until he injured his arm, on the longest title reign in the UFC at the time. And now you have Van, very exciting fighter, is on the top, and you have dangerous opponents like Kape coming up. You have other fighters that are on this card. Pull up the names here. I know we had, or maybe it was last week, we had some other flyweight fights with some, very strong potential behind these names. And it really makes me wonder, like, what will we see in 2026 when it comes to the flyweight division? I'm very excited for the flyweight division, and I hope you are too. I think it's one of the best divisions to watch right now. I would say that and welterweight are probably currently the hottest two divisions. There's a lot of other divisions that are pretty hot right now. I would say bantam, feather, and light are all looking pretty good. Middleweight, I think, is kind of good. It's kind of top heavy. Light heavyweight is also pretty top heavy. You have some really strong contenders at the top. Then there's kind of a drop off, and we're not even going to talk about heavyweight. I think the flyweight division could really be the division to watch in 2026. That or welterweight. Those two divisions right now are just absolutely on fire. Honestly, I'd probably put welterweight as the best division currently, flyweight second, but still, from what flyweight used to be, I think we have a very, very bright future for this division in 2026. And it's probably going to be spearheaded by the person who won this past weekend, Manel Kape. As much I can't stand the guy, the dude could fight. He's going to make things exciting. So moving on down the list, we had Kevin Vallejos. I might be mispronouncing that. You know me, I mispronounce names. And Giga Chikadze. Yes, I do know how to pronounce his name, but I'm going to call him Giga Chad, because why wouldn't I call him Giga Chad? Look at his name. Giga, Chikadze. You drop a few letters, you're left with Giga Chad. So Giga Chad, very fun fighter. I've been watching him for a good while now. And I actually thought he did pretty good in the first round. I don't have the stats up round by round. I have the stats up for like total, but not broken down by round. And he did lose total strikes, but I felt like he did better in round one. But he gets knocked out so bad in round two. It was one of the ugliest, probably the second ugliest knockout of the night. He gets caught with like a spinning, I can't remember if it was an elbow or a punch, but it was really, really ugly. And he went down bad. And so this guy, Kevin Vallejos, let's see if he is ranked. This was the featherweight division. And it looks like he is not ranked, but he just beat Giga Chikadze, who was ranked number 15. Again, these rankings haven't been updated yet, so I'm sure they'll get updated any day now. I imagine he's going to be number 15 now. And I see some people in the top 15 here that would be really exciting for him to fight. You have Patricio Pitbull at 12, Dan Ige at 13, Dan Ige, that is, David Onama. These could be some really fun fights for him to get involved with. So I say keep an eye on this guy. That is Kevin Vallejos, because that was a really impressive performance, really impressive ending sequence. So moving down the list, we have Cesare. Not even going to try to pronounce this one. Oleg, and then a whole bunch of other letters. I actually, preparing for this podcast, I saw this name, and I'm like, this is probably the hardest name to pronounce on the entire card. Let me listen to Bruce Buffer say this name, so I'm prepared when I go record this podcast episode to say it right. And Bruce Buffer says it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to be able to repeat that. There's no way. So I'm just going to call him Cesare, his first name. And going against Caesar, and just another variant of the same name, Caesar Almeida. And not a lot to say about this fight. It went to decision. Cesare won all 3 rounds. There was some wrestling, not a whole lot of striking. Cesare landed 14 strikes total in all 3 rounds, and Caesar landed only 12. So that's like not even 5 strikes per round. And Cesare gets 6 takedowns. So, yeah, not exactly the most exciting fight here. Not much to say. Cesare wins by unanimous decision. Won all 3 rounds, 30-27. So, yeah, that's that. Moving on. You have, this one. I talked earlier about Vallejos probably had the second best knockout of the night. This was the best knockout of the night, in my opinion. My goodness. So you have Melquizel, probably mispronouncing that, as always, Costa going against Morgan Charrier. I think that's actually how you pronounce it, Charrier. So I'm going to say Costa and Morgan. I'm going to go last name and first names. It'll just be easier. 1 minute and 14 seconds of the first round. Costa lands a head kick that was just like something you see out of a movie. It was picture perfect, right to the dome. And Morgan just goes stiff, down, out cold. Ugly knockout. Like, I was sitting on the couch and I just winced. I winced when that head kick landed. I was not expecting that. So I didn't go and look at all these results here. I did see that it was a quick finish, but I didn't pay attention to what the exact time was, and I didn't see who won. So I wasn't sure exactly when it was going to happen, who was going to land it. As soon as I saw that head kick land, I actually jumped in my seat, just kind of squirmed because of, what a nasty knockout that was. And he somehow didn't get a performance of the night bonus. That went to Vallejos, the one I mentioned earlier, getting the knockout on Giga Chad, and Manel Kape for his win over Royval. I really think it should have gone to Costa because this KO was beautiful. 1 minute, 14 seconds, that quick with that good of a KO. The only one that left someone completely just out cold on the whole card. Yeah. That should have been performance of the night. All right, now this next fight, there's a lot to say about this one. So you have Kennedy, another really hard name to pronounce, Nzechukwu. I'm just going to call him Kennedy. Going against Marcus Buchecha, much easier name to pronounce. So this match was a draw. Now, here's what's interesting. We've been talking a long time about fouls and how we need to do more about the fouls. Stop giving so many warnings. You'll see 1, 2, 3 warnings before anything happens, right? So it was an eye poke in the second round. That was the first eye poke of the night. It was the first eye poke of that round. It was the first foul of that round. And, of course, they separate them. They give the timeout for Buchecha to recover. And Herb Dean takes a point away. And I thought to myself, wow, no warning? That's actually good. Like, that's what I want to see. But then I remember in the first round, the same guy who landed the eye poke, Kennedy, also landed a foul in the first round. It wasn't an eye poke, that was a low blow. So he lands a low blow in the first round. So they separate him, give Marcus time to recover, and they continue. And then in the second round, Kennedy lands an eye poke. So of course they separate him, and then he does an eye poke. So then I'm left wondering, did Herb Dean take a point away because it was an eye poke, and we're really trying to crack down eye pokes? So that's it. So we saw one eye poke, boom, it's a point deduction. Or was it because it was the second foul of the fight? You had the low blow in the first round and then the eye poke in the second round. So then Herb Dean's like, okay, that's 2 fouls, even though it's 2 different rounds and 2 different types of fouls. It was still 2 fouls. Let's go and take a point away. Regardless, though, that led to a draw because you had Buchecha. Let's see in my notes here. So yeah, Buchecha would have won that round. So this is actually where it gets even more interesting. So I had Kennedy winning the first round and winning in the third round, although it was kind of close on, I think it was the first round, because I remember there was some back and forth. Kennedy is a striker and Buchecha is a grappler. It's very obvious. Buchecha just kept getting takedowns and working to get submissions, and Kennedy wanted to keep it standing and do some striking. Now, the second round is the one where there's the point deduction, but not only was there a point deduction, but Buchecha, after the eye poke incident, he was able to recover and he pushed through. He ends up taking Kennedy down and just completely pummels him. Almost finishes Kennedy after getting eye poked. So you've heard my co-host before talk about how I'm always more liberal with the 10-8 rounds. I'm always saying that should be a 10-8. That should be a 10-8. I really think that should have been a 10-8, not because of the point deduction, but just because of Buchecha's performance. And that would mean if you do a point deduction, that would have been a 10-7 round, which are really, really rare. Apparently, there's only been a few in UFC history. I don't have the stats up in front of me, but apparently it has happened before. There's been 10-7 rounds. I think that could have and maybe should have been a 10-7, which would have made Buchecha winning the whole fight just off that one round. And I'm not alone in thinking that, because you see whenever a new round starts, sometimes you'll see graphics come up where it's people talking on Twitter, or some people like to call it X, and someone will say, so-and-so 10-9. His striking's looking really good. He's really landing his jab. Or the other person, 10-8, he was dominant in the grappling and almost choked him out or whatever, right? So in my head, after I got through watching that second round, I'm like, it's 10-8 minimum, because Buchecha clearly won the round. If there's point deduction, it's 10-8. But if you give him a 10-8 off of performance, subtract the point deduction, that's 10-7 round. And whenever the graphics came up in round 3 where people on Twitter were talking about it, someone did point out that was probably a 10-7 round because of the point deduction. And I agree. So, yeah, very interesting. We could have had a 10-7, but that's not what happened. So the judges gave Kennedy rounds 1 and 3 and Marcus a 10-8 in round 2 because of the point deduction. And we're left with a draw. All 3 judges agreed it was a draw, 28-28 across the board. So that was the result of that one. But hey, at least we're starting to see some penalties for eye pokes. About time. I wish it would happen in more high-profile fights, but here we are. All right, now, you want to talk about weird scores. I at least understand the scores. Like I said, it could have been a 10-7, but I'm not going to argue too much if it says 10-8 and result in a draw. I'm not going to argue too much. This next fight, the first fight of the main card, I have strong issue with when it comes to the scores. I do not understand these scores one bit. So you have Bobby Green, now goes by King Green, going against Lance Gibson Jr. And all 3 rounds, Green outstruck him by a good bit. If you look at the total stats here, let me pull them up. I have them. Right here. You have, now again, I don't have the website pulled up where it breaks it down round by round, but I have for the total fight, Bobby Green, King Green, landed 65 strikes to Gibson's 30. That means there was over a 2-1 differential on strikes. So round 1, Green is classic Green. If you've ever watched a Bobby Green or King Green fight, you know that he likes to kind of walk forward with his hands down. He likes to kind of strut at you and kind of bait you to do something, and he just has quick reflexes and he'll hit you, right? And he was just walking down Gibson. Gibson was on his back foot pretty much the whole fight, minus a few grappling exchanges, which we'll get to in a minute. But Green was just walking down Gibson in that first round. And Green was landing more, but I don't think he was landing as flush in the first round. Gibson was landing more clean. He wasn't landing as often, but when he did land, it seemed to be more clean shots. Green was more kind of hitting a few grazing shots here and there. Some shots that are kind of half blocked, half not. like you punch and you block, but your hand gets through a little bit. He was landing a lot of that stuff. And then Gibson would occasionally like return fire, and he was landing really flush and really clean. But Green still did outstrike him in that round. So do you give it to Green because he was landing more and he was pushing forward, he's pushing the pace, so he had octagon control? Or do you give it to Gibson because he's landing more clean? There wasn't a lot of damage, so you can't really score off of that. So at the very least, you could call that a toss-up round. But I was leaning towards Green in round one. So I have him in my notes right here. Green pushing forward and taunting, Gibson backing up but striking close. That's my notes for round one. Round two, Green starts off landing even better than he did in all of round one. He just really starts pushing forward, and he's starting to land clean now. Where he was landing more grazing shots in round one, he's landing really clean. He is just taking it to Gibson. Gibson eventually, let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. Gibson ends up getting hit with the low blow, so they end up stopping the action for a little bit, but Gibson's able to recover. They go back to it, and then eventually Gibson gets Green down. He gets a takedown on Green, and eventually Green is able to fight his way back up. He's down. He's under Gibson's control for a little bit. Gibson didn't really do a lot. He didn't set up any submission holds. He does like a little bit of ground and pound, like lands a few hits, but not really a whole lot. He's mostly just trying to hold Bobby Green in place, and eventually Bobby Green's able to get back up to his feet. And after he gets back up to his feet, Green starts going back to the striking and just dominates the rest of the round. So, thinking to myself, if you get one takedown on a guy and you don't really do a lot with it, and the rest of the round, the other guy's just walking you down and just teeing off on you, and you're not landing hardly anything on him, there's no way you deserve to win that round. Third round hits, and Green is landing even better than second round. He is just taking it to Gibson. Eventually, Gibson gets one takedown, if you want to call it a takedown. Like, he shoots a takedown, is able to kind of get Green to fall back to like a seated position, but he doesn't secure him. Like, he doesn't go to the ground and keep a hold of him and keep him in place and hold him down to really secure a takedown. Like in wrestling, and I'm talking about the sport of wrestling, like that doesn't count as a pin. Like, you have to actually get a person down and then get control of them. And it's the same thing in jiu-jitsu, like for competitions where they have, you get into a position, you score points. Like, I guess in some organizations that would be considered a takedown, like getting their legs and making them drop to a seated position, but some probably wouldn't. Because when I say Green bounced right back up, it was immediately. It's like he almost got it was like a takedown that ended up resulting more like a trip, and he fell to a seated position and immediately pops right back up. Immediately. So Gibson had no control of him whatsoever, and Green goes right back to the striking, teeing off on him, and then eventually Green gets a takedown of his own, a good takedown where he gets control of Gibson, and then he finishes the third round, finishes the fight where he's on top of him, has Gibson under his control, and he's landing really solid ground and pound. So the way I look at it, first round's kind of close, but I give it to Green. Second round Green, third round Green. This should have been 30-27, at the very least 29-28 Green, if you think that the cleaner shots by Gibson in round one was enough to win the round. Debatable, but I could at least see the argument. Best case scenario for Gibson, 29-28, Green wins. Worst case scenario, at least from Gibson's eyes, and also what I agree with on the scores, it should be King Green 30-27. What was the result? A split decision. Green still won, so I guess it doesn't matter. But that means one of the judges gave it to Gibson. How? I don't understand this. I really don't understand some of these scores that I see in MMA for years now, but this is one of the weirdest ones. It was not a robbery because Green won, but if one other judge would have agreed with that third judge, this would have been one of the biggest robberies I've ever seen, because really I honestly think it should have been 30-27 Green. and I have the numbers up right here. 65 strikes. This is for the whole fight, not broken down by round. Green landed over double the strikes. Gibson had 2 takedowns, but one of them amounted to nothing, and the other one amounted to very little. And then Green's 1 takedown did way more. On what planet is Gibson the winner of this fight? So whoever that judge was that gave it to Gibson, I hope he never judges a fight ever again. And the other 2 only gave it 29-28 for Green, when I really think it should have been 30-27. So even though they gave it to Green, I still think they were giving Gibson too much credit. I really don't understand the scoring. This is really, really weird. Again, the right guy won, so I guess it doesn't matter. But this is some really weird scoring. Really suspect scoring. I don't really get this. So, anyway, that was the main card. I didn't really pay much attention to the undercard. I did watch one fight, though, because if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know that we here at the Ground and Pound Cast, we love Neil Magny. He is a guy that's been fighting for a very long time. It just seems like a really respectful guy, really respectable guy. And he puts on really exciting fights. And he sometimes gets fed to these absolute monsters of up-and-comers. And he's one of those guys who can sometimes, even when he's going against someone who on paper just looks way better, he finds a way to win. I talked about before this podcast even happened, before this podcast even started, he was in a fight where on paper, I thought to myself, Magny should lose this fight, but my gut's telling me Magny's going to win. And he lost round 1, he lost round 2, and he ends up coming back and winning by TKO in round 3. Then there's the fight earlier this year, which was kind of controversial, where the ref seemed like to call it kind of early, like Magny had tapped at the very end of round 1, but he didn't. So they decided to let the fight continue, which I think was the better move to make, because Magny did not tap and there was like just a couple seconds left. And Magny comes back and wins by submission of his own in the 3rd round. So we have dubbed him on this podcast the Comeback King. We're big fans of Neil Magny, and he's going against a guy who is very dangerous. Yaroslav Amasov. Whew, these names are tough. A guy who is 29-1, 9 wins. He was 28-1 going into the fight. He's now 29-1. He beats Neil Magny in the 1st round by anaconda choke. This guy, I'm looking at his background here. He's a world level competitor, getting gold medals in Sambo. 29 wins, 1 loss. And 9 of his wins are by knockout, 12 of his wins by submission. This dude has a pretty solid finish rate, 8 by decision, but still he has a good bit more. That's still around 70-ish% of his wins or a little over 70% of his wins are by finish. And I look at like some of the people he's fought, because whenever someone has a really big record like that, like almost 30 wins, you have in the ballpark of 30 fights, you only have 1 loss. Are you just this absolute phenom? Or are you fighting a bunch of nobodies? So I go back and I look at his record, and yeah, a lot of the early part of his career, like the first half or so, maybe a little over half, first 60% are nobodies, but then he starts fighting some names that I recognize starting in 2018, fighting in Bellator, then switches over to the UFC. Cage Fury first, and then this was his UFC debut. He's actually fought people that I recognize: Douglas Lima, Eric Silva, Gerald Harris. These are names that I've seen before. These are pretty good fighters, and he's beat them all. In his very last fight in Bellator, he actually lost by KO in the 3rd round against Jason Jackson, where he lost the Bellator Welterweight World Championship. So this was a Bellator World Champion, and he ends up losing at the end of his Bellator run, but that was the only loss of his career. He was 27-0 whenever he defended that belt and lost it. He did get 1 defense with it. He won it, then he defended it and unified it against, I guess they had an interim champion, and then he loses the one after that. Okay, it happens, and then he won by Anaconda choke in Cage Fury, makes UFC debut, wins by Anaconda choke again. This dude has a good bit of Darce submissions and Anaconda submissions. For those of you that don't really do jiu-jitsu or know much about jiu-jitsu, don't compete in it or practice it, Anacondas and Darces are very similar submissions in that they're both like a front headlock position choke. They're just different angle. Like one is like your choking arm goes in by the head and out by the arms, and for the other one it's in by the arms and out by the head, or neck I should say. But it's still a very similar setup. So it seems like this guy, with all of his Darce wins and Anaconda wins, this guy, if he gets into like a front headlock position, let's say you shoot on him and he sprawls and gets you in front headlock position, starts working, you're in danger with this guy. So I'm going to keep an eye on this guy. Make sure you watch the next time Yaroslav Amazov, these names, man, Ukrainian 29-1 competitor that is now making waves in the welterweight division in the UFC. He's also fought in middleweight, but it looks like he's been in welterweight for a good while now. So I said it earlier in this podcast, the welterweight division is probably the most exciting division overall. I still say flyweights creeping up on them. It's really fun to watch as well. But welterweight's got a lot of killers, and this guy just joined the ranks, another killer to keep your eye on. So yeah, that was the very last event in 2025. That's the very last ESPN event ever for the UFC. So that's what we got to witness. It was a pretty fun card to watch. There were a few good fights. Some of them not so much. Some were pretty decent. There's a few names that caught my eye, people that I'm going to have to really pay attention to. We got to see Bobby Green, King Green, get back in the win column with very weird scoring. Manel Kape, very impressive win, and making a big statement in the division, leapfrogging up the ranks, and is now going for a title shot. It hasn't been announced yet, but assuming he doesn't get injured in training or something, I see no reason why it should be anybody but him that gets the title shot. Kevin Vallejos, another name to keep your eye on. There's some really good performances on this event. So that was basically it. That was UFC Fight Night in Las Vegas. UFC Fight Night. UFC on ESPN. Royval versus Manel Kape. Not Cape, Kape. So we're about to go on a very long dry spell where there's going to be no UFC events. The next UFC event is going to be January 24th. So I don't know if is that 5 weeks, 6 weeks. We have a good bit of time where there's going to be no events. So there's going to be no UFC predictions to make or card reviews to have for a handful of weeks. So we're going to have to fill in this gap talking about other things. So continue tuning in most of these weeks. Maybe every single week except for one. I think we are going to work to make sure we put out some type of content. We are going to be covering any kind of UFC news that comes up. There's actually been some recent UFC news, some MMA news that I think is worthy of talking about, but I think we're going to save that whenever we have the rest of the crew available. And when we have a chance to really break things down, we're going to discuss some of those items, and if any other kind of news comes up, any kind of weird happenings or big events announced or anything like that, we'll be sure to cover that. If we could think of any good side topics that we want to talk about in the world of MMA, we're going to be talking about those kind of things. So we do have ideas for a lot of different things to talk about. For those of you who interact with us on social media, whether it's through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, which we don't really use, or the YouTube comment section, if you have topics that you think would be good to, use to fill in the gap during this time, let us know. Give us your suggestions, make it interactive, and we'll make sure that we keep the content rolling. So This has been fun. The very first solo episode. I knew it would happen eventually. I've been rambling on my own for 40 minutes now. I did it. I somehow did it. It was fun. So thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for listening to me talk about this event and talk about the future. And one of the things we do want to talk about in these upcoming, empty weekends where there's no events going on, but we still want to talk about stuff. One of those things is going to be talking about the future. We're going to be talking about what we think is going to be in store in 2026. And we're also going to be doing a year in review for the year of 2025. So make sure you tune in for all that, and it will be fun. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.